Hello everyone. Arknights Chapter 9 has been released, and I wanted to talk about my first impressions of it, as well as a few other updates that came with Chapter 9. So one thing that I thought was very interesting about Chapter 9 is that if we view the announcement for the chapter, Stormwatch, that it requires main story 3-8 in order to play Chapter 9. So, rather than needing to complete all 8 chapters before you start Chapter 9, you can start it right after you complete Chapter 3. Which I thought was actually a really genius move on the part of the developers, because if we look at this, the recommended level is Elite 1 level 30 for the first stage, and then if we go to episode 4 here, it is Elite 1 level 30. So the impressions that I get on that anyway is that for arcs that come in the future, it will be effectively the next chapter. Like every 4 chapters, it'll be effectively like Chapter 4. And I think that was a really genius move, because that makes it so that newer players don't have to play through all 8 chapters and down the line, all 9 chapters in order to get to that different content. And also, Chapter 9 does have a recap, so it does kind of get into, obviously, the main, what it says in the main story, and there are some minor spoilers in that recap, especially for Chapter 6, personally, but it doesn't go too in-depth either. So for Chapter 9, when it comes to gameplay, they really switched things up with the Dublin enemies. So each one of these has refraction, which means that they have plus 70 res, which basically means they take very little arts damage, and the only way to remove that is to silence them. So refraction is an ability that can be silenced, although for Arknights, especially for boss enemies or enemies with a certain ability tied to like the enemy type, Arknights isn't exactly clear which abilities can be silenced and what can't, because when you look at this description, obviously all it says is just refraction, when in effect res plus 30. And in my opinion, if they did have like a side note, hey, this can be silenced, this can't be silenced, that would be nice. But also, it does lead to experimentation of using silence to figure that out as well. So there's definitely pros and cons if they put that in there. Another thing too is that when it comes to the enemies, it says attack pattern. Before it would just say melee, and now it says attack pattern melee and whatnot. So what I really like about the further along you go in Chapter 9 is that you face off against these heavy defenders. Now usually when it comes to these really big guys with high defense, arts damage is pretty much your go-to. But in this chapter, in my opinion anyway, it helps you think outside of the box without just straight up going for arts damage. I mean, you sure can if you want, but it will take a while to take these guys out then. So, in my opinion, they did a really good job on making the gimmick interesting while also giving way for more abilities to be silenced. And unfortunately, at this point, we don't really have a huge number of operators that have the silence ability, but more opportunities for silence to be useful, in my opinion, is good. The other thing, too, is that more materials came out. So the synthetic solvent, as well as this one, the compound cutting fluid, those are brand new that you can only farm in Chapter 9 at this point, from what I've seen. So previously in Chapter 8, when they introduced these things, the crystalline, they added older stages in the previous chapters in order to allow you to farm those without needing to go all the way to Chapter 8. So it's kind of being like, you choose which direction you go, so to speak, and then that will allow you to get different materials, which is rather interesting as well. So overall, I have been enjoying Chapter 9, but as you saw there, I'm not super far in it. So other updates that I want to mention is that, like I said, in the enemy archives, it says it just gives that extra clarity of attack pattern. And also it does clarify whether or not something stacks, or at least for the phalanx infantry. Yes, we totally need Dublin artillery. So anything besides that is that you can now choose, or at least on the global server, I'm not sure about how the Chinese server works. I'm guessing you can choose between the two there as well. But you can choose between for the operators that have an additional voice actor. So certain operators got a Chinese voice actor. So you can now choose between a Chinese voice actor or the original Japanese voice actor, whichever you prefer. And according to the 2nd anniversary live stream, if I remember correctly, they are working on English voice actors for Arknights in the future. So I really like this system. You can either do operators individually, or you can make it so that overall you choose one set of voices. So that's really cool. Another addition is when we go to medics, the classic AoE medics, or multi-target medics they're called in-game, they now have modules. And most of these modules actually increase the range for these multi-target medics. So range expands, as well as giving the standard attack boost. And I highly recommend that if you have Perfumer to Elite 2, where's Perfumer? There we go. Perfumer's module was incredibly easy to unlock and purchase. So if you have 4 stars that get modules, it seems like for sure the 4 stars are incredibly easy to unlock, and they don't cost much for materials. So keep that in mind. So for Perfumer and her trait, her passive healing, getting that extra 25 attack will help a decent amount. The other set of operators that got modules are the Deadeye snipers, like Andrea here, but I don't have her at Elite 2, or any of the Deadeye snipers to Elite 2 right now. So there is that as well. And then Silik came out with this chapter as well. So overall, with these updates, I've been really enjoying the additional clarity when it comes to the enemies. I mean, I didn't really think that it was misleading or anything if they just said melee, but adding attack pattern melee, I think it's as clear as you can get right there. And then adding the extra modules, they look really interesting to me. Then definitely worth grinding for most of the operators that have them. And then Chapter 9 overall has been really enjoyable, especially with that new gimmick of enemies being highly resistant to res, and if that trend continues, I think the next few chapters are definitely going to be physical damage focused, which is really nice. Because in Chapter 8 especially, it seemed like the hard enemies, going arts damage was kind of the way to go. And one last thing that I want to mention before signing off here is that using Arknights on my phone, which is typically what I play on, it seems like they drastically updated the optimization. It seems like everything loads and does actions like the base and stuff a lot faster than before. It's a little bit better on the emulator that I'm using, but not significantly. But on my phone, I can definitely see a massive difference in the optimization in terms of doing those smaller type actions that would sometimes take like half a second or a second to load. It seems like it does that, does those instantly now, which is really nice. So overall, this update, big thumbs up from me. So with that, hope you all have enjoyed Chapter 9, or at least in the process of it, like I am. And with that, thank you very much for watching, and have a wonderful day.